The multipurpose room at Ridgeway Elementary smelled faintly of disinfectant and burnt coffee. Folding chairs scraped against the tile floor as parents settled in, murmuring softly, checking phones, balancing paper cups on their knees. A handwritten sign taped to the door read, "PT a monthly meeting, all welcome." But the atmosphere inside didn't feel welcoming. At the front of the room stood Linda Carver, the PTA president. White, early 50s, immaculate posture, cardigan draped perfectly over her shoulders like a uniform. She tapped the microphone once, twice, testing it, then smiled the kind of smile that signaled control more than warmth. "All right, let's get started," Linda said brightly. "We have a full agenda tonight, so we'll need to stay on track." A few parents nodded automatically. Near the middle row sat Aaron Thompson. Aaron was black, late 30s, tall but seated carefully, shoulders slightly hunched as if he'd learned to make himself smaller in rooms like this. His son, Eli, was in 2nd grade. Aaron had never missed a PTA meeting since the start of the school year, not because he enjoyed them, but because he'd learned what happened when parents stopped paying attention. He had a folder on his lap, neatly organized, tabs visible. Linda's eyes flicked to it briefly, then away. "We'll begin with fundraising updates," she continued. "Then we'll move on to volunteer sign-ups and—" Aaron raised his hand. Not abruptly, not aggressively, just raised it. Linda paused mid-sentence, her smile tightening. "Yes," she said, already sounding inconvenienced. "I'd like to ask about the disciplinary policy," Aaron said calmly, "specifically how it's being applied." The room shifted. A few parents glanced at each other. Someone coughed. Another leaned back in their chair. Linda's smile stayed fixed. "That's not on the agenda tonight." Aaron nodded. "I understand, but it's affecting multiple families, including mine." Linda tilted her head slightly. "You can schedule time with administration for individual concerns." "This isn't individual," Aaron replied evenly. "It's a pattern." The word landed heavier than the rest. Linda's fingers tightened around the microphone. "We're here to support the school," she said, her tone sharpening just enough to notice. "Not to create conflict." Aaron kept his voice level. "Asking questions isn't creating conflict." Linda let out a small laugh, polite, dismissive. "Let's not derail the meeting." A parent in the front row nodded in agreement. Another avoided eye contact. Aaron lowered his hand but didn't look away. "I'd still like my concern noted in the minutes," he said. Linda blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'd like it recorded," Aaron repeated. "That I raised this issue." Linda's smile finally faltered. "We don't record open commentary like that," she said. "Only agenda items." Aaron glanced around the room. "Is this meeting being recorded?" Linda stiffened. "The PTA Executive Board records meetings for internal reference," she said quickly. "That's standard." Aaron nodded slowly. "Then I'd like to request access to the audio." A murmur rippled through the chairs. Linda's eyes hardened. "Those recordings aren't public." "Actually," Aaron said, calm but precise, "under district policy, PTA meetings tied to school governance are subject to records requests." Linda stared at him. "You seem very prepared," she said coolly. Aaron met her gaze. "I had to be." Linda leaned closer to the microphone. "We're moving on." She clicked to the next slide. Aaron sat back in his chair, heart pounding, not because he'd spoken up, but because he'd seen the shift. The way Linda's tone changed the moment he asked for something to be documented. The way discomfort moved through the room like a warning. Someone behind him whispered, "Why is he making this awkward?" Aaron didn't turn around. He looked down at his folder instead and slid out a single sheet of paper. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Formal request, meeting records." He hadn't planned to use it tonight, but now, listening to Linda's voice tighten as she rushed through the rest of the agenda, Aaron realized something important. She wasn't afraid of the question. She was afraid of the record. And once audio became official, this meeting would no longer belong to whoever controlled the microphone. Aaron didn't interrupt again for the rest of the meeting. He listened. That was the part most people underestimated, his patience. While Linda moved briskly through budget line items and volunteer schedules, Aaron watched the room instead of the slides. He noticed which parents nodded automatically and which ones stiffened when certain topics were mentioned. He noticed how often Linda referred to "we" when she meant the executive board, and how rarely she invited discussion. Most of all, he noticed the silence. When the meeting adjourned, chairs scraped back and conversations resumed in low clusters. Parents gathered their coats and cups, the tension dissipating as people prepared to leave it behind in the room. Aaron stayed seated. Linda unplugged the microphone and began stacking papers, her movements clipped. She avoided looking in his direction until he stood and approached the front table, folder tucked under his arm. "Linda," he said calmly. She looked up, a practiced smile snapping back into place. "Yes?" "I'd like to formally request the audio recording from tonight's meeting," Aaron said, "as well as the last two meetings." Linda's smile didn't waver, but something in her eyes tightened. "Those are internal PTA materials." Aaron nodded. "I'm aware of how they're labelled. I'm also aware of District Policy 4.12. A few parents nearby slowed, pretending not to listen. Linda set her papers down. "Those policies apply to school boards, not parent groups." "Not exactly," Aaron replied. "When PTA meetings are used to discuss or influence disciplinary practices, they fall under advisory governance, which makes the records accessible upon request." Linda folded her arms. "Where did you hear that?" Aaron met her gaze. "From the district's legal office." That did it. Linda glanced around the room, then leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You're turning this into something it doesn't need to be." Aaron kept his voice just as low. "I didn't start it. I just asked for it to be recorded." Linda straightened. "I'll have to consult with the board." "Of course," Aaron said. "Please let me know by email." He turned to leave, then paused. "And just to be clear, this is an official records request. I'll be submitting it in writing tonight." Linda didn't respond. She didn't have to. Her silence said enough. At home, Aaron sat at his dining table long after his son, Eli, had gone to bed. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside. He opened his laptop and drafted the request carefully. No emotion, no accusation, just facts. Meeting dates, purpose, policy citations. He attached the form he'd pulled out during the meeting, scanned clean and legible. He sent it to the PTA's official email, CCing the school principal and the district records officer. Then he waited. The reply came the next afternoon. Not from Linda, from the PTA secretary. "We've received your request and are reviewing its applicability. Please note that PTA meetings are not typically subject to public records disclosure." Aaron read it once. Then he forwarded it to the district records officer he'd spoken to weeks earlier, the one who'd advised him quietly after a different meeting, a different concern. His message was brief. "They're refusing. Please advise." 10 minutes later, his phone rang. "Aaron," the officer said, "you're correct. If those recordings exist, they're disclosable." Aaron closed his eyes for a moment, not in relief, in confirmation. "What happens next?" he asked. "We request them formally," the officer replied. "On your behalf." Aaron thanked him and hung up. He looked at his folder again, now thicker than before, because the meeting had already ended. But the record was just beginning. And once audio was requested officially, silence was no longer an option. The following week felt longer than it should have. Aaron went through his normal routine, work, school pickup, dinner, homework, but everything moved under a low, persistent tension, like a sound just quiet enough to notice. He didn't bring the PTA up with Eli. He didn't vent to other parents. He let the process move the way processes were supposed to move, even when they tried to resist. On Thursday afternoon, an email arrived from the district records office. The subject line was brief and unmistakable. Formal records request issued. Ridgeway Elementary. PTA. Aaron opened it slowly. The district had submitted an official request for all existing audio recordings from the last 3 PTA meetings, citing advisory governance, documented parental concerns, and compliance timelines. The PTA had 5 business days to respond. 5 days meant pressure, and pressure changed behaviour. That evening, Aaron's phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't have saved. "This is Linda. Please call me." Aaron stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. "Email is fine." 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," the text finally read. Aaron didn't respond. Minutes later, an email arrived from Linda's address, carefully worded and overly polite. She suggested a private conversation, expressed concern about escalation, and emphasized how much she valued community harmony. Aaron read it once, then archived it. Harmony, he had learned, was often just another word for quiet. The next day, a different email went out. This one sent to the entire PTA mailing list. Clarification regarding meeting records. It explained that recent meetings had been informal, that recordings were intended for note-taking only, and that the PTA was consulting counsel on whether the files constituted official records. Aaron didn't smile, but he felt something settle into place. They were preparing. By Monday morning, rumours had started circulating. Another parent stopped Aaron in the pickup line and spoke in a hushed voice. "Is it true you're forcing the PTA to release tapes?" Aaron kept his tone even. "I requested records. The district did the rest." The parent nodded slowly. "Good." That afternoon, the principal emailed staff and parents announcing that future PTA meetings would include a clearly stated public comment period and that minutes, not just summaries, would be published online. No explanation, no attribution, just a change. On Wednesday, the deadline hit. At 4:56 p.m., 4 minutes before close of business, Aaron received an email from the District Records Office with 2 audio files attached. PTA_September.m.p3 PTA_meeting_October.m.p3. The message was short. Files received, review as needed. Aaron downloaded them but didn't press play right away. He sat back in his chair, the weight of the moment heavier than he expected. He hadn't been trying to catch anyone saying something outrageous. He hadn't been looking for a scandal. He just wanted proof that the silence he'd felt in that room wasn't imagined. When he finally clicked play, Linda's voice filled the room. Clear, confident, unmistakable. And there it was. The moment his hand went up. The shift in tone. The laugh. Then, quieter, just off mic but audible enough. "We're not opening that can of worms." A few seconds later, "We'll take this offline." Aaron closed his eyes, because offline didn't mean resolution. It meant control. And now, that control had been interrupted by the one thing Linda Carver hadn't planned for. An official record that spoke for itself. Aaron listened to the rest of the audio in one sitting. He didn't skip. He didn't fast forward. He let the meeting unfold exactly as it had, moment by moment, with all the pauses and side comments that never made it into written summaries. Linda's voice stayed calm on the surface, but underneath it was something else. Impatience when questions came from the wrong direction, reassurance when they came from the right one. The contrast was subtle, but once heard, impossible to ignore. There were no slurs, no raised voices, no single explosive moment that could be dismissed as a misunderstanding. What there was, instead, was pattern. Questions redirected, concerns minimized, silence encouraged. When Aaron's issue came up again later in the meeting, after he'd stopped speaking, Linda referred to it as a one-off concern and suggested that some parents may be misinterpreting normal discipline. Someone laughed softly. Another voice agreed. No one challenged it. Aaron paused the audio and sat back, staring at the wall. This was why the record mattered, not because it proved malice, but because it captured behavior that only existed when people thought no one would replay it. The next morning, Aaron forwarded the files to the district records officer with a short note. "Thank you. I've reviewed them." An hour later, the officer replied, "We have as well." That afternoon, the school sent out another email, this one from the principal, CCing the PTA Executive Board and the district. It announced an independent review of disciplinary practices and parent advisory procedures. It stated clearly that PTA leadership would no longer determine which concerns were appropriate for meetings. Public comment would be guaranteed. Audio recordings would be retained and available upon request going forward. Linda's name appeared at the bottom of the email, but not in the role it used to. By the end of the week, the PTA announced new elections to better align with district transparency goals. Linda did not run again. Her farewell message spoke about time commitments and passing the torch. It didn't mention the audio, it didn't have to. At the next PTA meeting, Aaron sat in the same room, in the same chair. This time, there was a sign on the front table that read, "Meeting is being recorded." When Aaron raised his hand, no one told him it wasn't on the agenda. The new chairperson nodded and said, "Go ahead, we're listening." Aaron spoke calmly, clearly, without notes. Other parents followed. Some shared experiences they'd never voiced before. Others asked questions they'd clearly been holding on to. The room felt different. Not louder, not angrier, just honest. That night, as Aaron walked home with Eli, his son looked up at him and asked, "Did your meeting go okay?" Aaron smiled. "Yeah," he said. "It did." "What did you do?" Eli asked. Aaron thought for a moment. "I made sure people had to listen." Eli nodded, satisfied, and skipped ahead. Later, alone at the table, Aaron filed the audio away in his folder. He didn't label it evidence or complaint. He labeled it record. Because the most powerful thing he'd done wasn't raising his voice or demanding attention. It was insisting that what happened be preserved. Once the meeting audio became official, no one could pretend they hadn't heard it. And once silence lost its cover, the room finally had space for the truth.